Okay, now I can start. Hello, everyone. I will talk about web design basics, as you can see. And yes, this presentation contained intended reference to Futurama, as you can already see. If you don't know me, I'm Janine. I'm your, let's call me host. Well, actually, this is me. That's how I normally look like. And I'm working at Trivago for 3 years already, and I'm a UX architect, but I just switched. So I was a UI developer before that. And yes, obviously, I do like Futurama. So I have a few questions. Have you ever wondered why websites have current design patterns? Or if designers are just creative people and design what they think just looks nice? And if people get influenced by design, and also why psychology has something to do with that? So, good news, everyone. In this talk, I will talk about these design patterns and go a bit more in the psychology behind it. But before we start talking about this, like Gestalt principles or also usability heuristics, I need to go a bit back in history, but let's have a short lesson with the professor about that. So we go back in the year of 1886, where two smart people just tried to understand the philosophy of Gestalt psychology and the roots of the theory, which were introduced by David Hume, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and Immanuel Kant, and some others. So the concept of Gestalt was first introduced in philosophy and psychology in 1890 by Ehrenfels and Husserl. Both worked independent from each other, and both were inspired by a work which is called Contribution to the Analysis of Sensation. They both formulated the very similar concept of Gestalt and figure a moment. They formulated the following. Gestalt psychology is an attempt to understand the laws behind the ability to acquire and maintain meaningful perception in an apparently chaotic world. So, take a break. Let's think about this. So, maybe let's have a short look on a few things, and maybe we try to understand more what he's talking about. Have a look at this. What can you see? Who of you can see what's on this picture? Hands up. And it's really interesting because I would like to see all your hands, because no matter what, you will see something. So first you might see just a bunch of black dots, some other more black areas, but out of a sudden, you might see a dog under a tree sniffing. So you do not see the dog's ears first, you do not see the dog's legs first, but you see the whole picture. So let's have a look at another example. What do you see? Do you see a triangle? Do you see kind of Pac-Man? Can you see the ball? Do you see a snake in the water like Loch Ness or something? But maybe let's move on to another one, if it will work. Do you see the dimensions? Which corner is in the back and which corner is in the front? Or is both true? Do you see a vase, or do you see two people facing each other? Or do you see both? One last example. Do you see the same object in different angles? Do you see the same object transformed? The big question is, what did we just see? How come that we see or perceive those objects as a whole? There are names for these, and I will walk you through those. The first one is emergence. Gestalt theory, so Gestalt is a German word which means figure or shape. Gestalt theory does not have an explanation for how this perception of the dog is perceived, so I'm very sorry about this. I can't really explain you that. It is what it is. The next one is reification. Reification can be treated by the visual system as real contours. Then we saw that one. multi-stability, which is, again, Gestalt does not have any explanation on how images appear. We only know that they do. The last one, invariance. Simply geometrical objects are recognized independent of rotation, translation, and scale. But still, you might ask yourself, why? And one thing I forgot to mention, how we call those, these are the key principles of Gestalt system. Going back to the question, why? So we might need to have a look into our brain first. It's just simply the way how our brain works. It creates structure in this chaotic world, what I was talking about beforehand. And thinking about that on how many things our brain perceives per second, let's have a look at this. So as you can see, we have 10 million bits per second that our eyes perceive. But just 40 of them we actually realize, we actually see. Keeping that in mind, how well trained our brain is to create a structure for us. Going back to the dog, as I said, we do not see each and every small bit. We see more the whole thing. At some point, the dog is just there. One thing I like to mention is this quote. The whole is different than the sum of its parts, not greater, not less than, just different. The whole is important. The parts of the whole are important. The whole is, as it comprised of its part, is important and separate from each other too. There's the dog again. If you haven't seen it yet, maybe another chance. Who of you sees the dog? Yay. So what happens is that our brain connects these things, and maybe also from learned patterns, as now that I explained you that we see a dog there, you now see the dog, right? And we also know how a dog looks like when the dog sniffs, and you also know how this breed looks like of the dog. The concept of grouping things is called Prägnanz. Sorry, yeah, that's German again. When we have a group of objects, we tend to see them as forming a group. And I'm extremely happy about this right now, because this is Gestalt principles. And I really, really hope that at some point you will also super excited about it. So don't worry, I go a bit more in the direction. So these are the Gestalt principles, or principles of grouping. They are a set of principles in psychology, first proposed by Gestalt psychologists, to account for the observation that humans naturally perceive as objects, as organized patterns, and a principle known as Prägnanz. This is a bunch of list of these Gestalt principles, but for now I would just focus on the first ones. So let's try another thing. Do you see lines, or do you see a simple street? Do you see triangles, or do you see a pyramid? Do you see lines, or a letter? This is simplicity. Do you see dots, and a car, and also this shape? Or do you see the whole thing? And somehow, once everything is together, we can create something like this. And simplicity is the user interprets the whole, not just the small parts. The next one I will walk you through is closure. Do you see lines, or do you see a rectangle? Do you see lines and shapes, or do you see a basket icon? And what is that? Well, it's a logo. For closure, we can say that the user completes the missing parts as long as enough information is given. And we have many logos like this, right? So we don't even really see like that the hat is fully done of this bear, but we know it's there. The next one is called figure ground. So we have something in the background, and we have something in the front. For example, something from the internet that most of you know, everyone knows, that. So what you see here is that you have this pop-up which tells us that there's 20% off the moment you sign up. In this scenario, we have the background, which is the actual website, and we have something in the front, which is our figure. But if you analyze this a bit more, even in the background, I hope you can see that, you see the male model. That's the background image. In front of it, it's headline and a CTA. That's also, again, figure ground. We can drive the user's attention with this principle. The user separates important information from non-important information. This one, proximity. Do you see rows or do you see columns? And what happens if I add some lines to it? Then it's very clear, right? We do see columns, we do see rows. We have many examples for that. For example, if we see the form field, you can definitely see that there are rows and columns. Amazon is doing this a lot, and also is grouping these things. So we see the two rows, but we also have columns in between. So the user perceives objects which are closer together as belonging together or connected. Similarity. Is the first things, are they similar or are they different? And is it the same format or the same files? Look at this. We always have, and we know it from Twitter or other platforms, we always have kind of an image, we always have a name, we always have a date. Even though the date is different, we have the actual content, whatever this guy says. And we also have icons which are the same, but also there the number is different. But in the end, it's similar. Similarity and therefore consistency will always help the user to understand a product better and navigate a website easier. Let's have a look at this. Continuation. Do you see dots and lines, or is it a path? And also, this is how our written language works. We have another example for this one, which is above, you see the progress bar. We know from checkout processes in online shops. Belongs in the same category. It is easier for the user to follow a structure. But I want to mention something else. With all these examples I showed you, maybe you have already realized that some of these principles are also working together. This is a really nice overview that you could see that it's not just closure there, but also figure ground. There is past experience, which is also one which I haven't covered, and so on. So let's have a look at another one, which I haven't mentioned yet, but I use the same examples from before. Common fate. Both have a common fate. We have the dots, we have the lines, we have a street. Common fate. If we have a look at this, we have the slider. Not just that we know from a slider, depending on which direction I click, it will have a common fate and continues, but also the cars looking in the same or facing the same direction, common fate. Even if you think about animation, so the way the pop-ups will show up is a common fate. All the content on this pop-up shows up at the same time, common fate. And for common fate, we could say objects that move in the same direction are perceived as more related compared to objects that don't move or move in a different direction. So let me just quickly go back to the beginning. I asked these questions, or was just checking who of you wonders about this. And I covered a couple of them. Sure, designers are creative people, we know that, right? I mean, everyone does a great education in this, and they don't just make stuff pretty. They really need to know what they're actually doing. Also, you saw that users can be influenced, as you saw with the pop-up. Sure, if you sign up, you get 20%. And I also hope by now that you kind of understand the psychology has something to do with it. But we haven't really covered yet is why websites have these recurrent design patterns. So we kind of touched it, but I want to try to explain it with a different theory of many, many others, which also might explain why we see recurring design patterns. And I want to introduce you to the 10 usability heuristics. That's a guidelines for a user experience based on psychological background. What does that mean? So based on the heuristics evaluation method for computer software that helps to identify usability problems in the user interface design. That was done in the 90s. So you might ask, why will this create design patterns? But if the designer follows these principles and guidelines, she or he will make that the usability of a website, or will make the usability of a website, and therefore also the user experience better, and at some point follow standards. These standards will create patterns. Let's say a designer creates a new feature for a website by using these principles and guidelines. This feature will work out because we know it, we tested it, we user tested it, and at some point other websites pick up on it, and that will become a standard. One example, that. Google Plus really tried hard to also have something similar to the thumbs up button from Facebook, but Facebook was already quicker, it was already there, and other websites also picked up on this, like LinkedIn, and the thumbs up button became a standard. And that is already number 4 of the usability heuristics, which is consistency and standard. Users should not have to wonder whether different words, situations, or actions mean the same thing. Follow platform conversations. Another example, that. Whoever worked with Foundation, Bootstrap, or other frameworks, these are standards. Even there you can create a consistency, or by using also pattern libraries, you create standards and also consistency. But let me try to walk you through all the other 9. So number 1 is visibility of system status. The system should always keep users informed about what is going on through appropriate feedback within reasonable time. Easy one. We all know that. So we have the progress bars in different things on websites if we put one file somewhere else. And you can even see how it how it developed from the very first one. You don't really have too much content, too much information, to the other one where you can even see how many files, how long does it take, and so on. So we create even better standards, and other systems will pick up on it. And also the checkout process is already kind of a standard. We all know about this. Number 2, match between system and the real world. The system should speak the user's language with words, phrases, and concepts familiar to the user, rather than system-oriented terms. Follow real-world conversations, making information appear in a natural and logical order. And with that, I'm not talking about that it should be the language that you speak, but also the way you speak. And you know already that there are copywriters out there, but there's even a more in this direction job title created, which is the user experience copywriter, which focus even more on this. An example could be this. So it's not just sign up or anything else like the submit button, but it's actually saying, get me free cheat sheets now. And also the difference between view your dashboard and view my dashboard is a complete different thing. I perceive it completely different. So this is a different language these people use. Number 3, user control and freedom. Users often choose system function by mistake and will need a clearly marked emergency exit to leave the unwanted state without having to go through an extended dialogue. Support undo and redo. We all know about this. We see this a lot. Are you really sure you want to delete this? But also autosave. Autosave saves our lives these days. And you can also see it on these Google Sheets or anywhere else that it will constantly autosave for you. Sure, you can click the button yourself, so you have the freedom to save it yourself, but also it will be saved for you. Then we have number 4, but we talked about this already, so I jump over to number 5, error prevention. Even better than good error messages is a careful design which prevent a problem from occurring first place. So what happens there is you make a typo in Google or any other, and it will already suggest you the corrected version. And also preventing errors, like if you create a new password, goes also in the direction. Number 6, recognition rather than recall. Make objects, actions, and options visible. The user should not have to remember information from one part of the dialogue to another. Instructions for use of the system should be visible or easily retrievable whenever appropriate. I will use the same example. It's not just that I made a typo, but also Google suggests me other things. So it might even be useful if you search for something and related topics show up, so you can pick up on this as well. Number 7, flexibility and efficiency of use. If you have a user who's used to the system or who's not used to the system yet. So in this scenario, if you want to download Foundation, what I was talking about earlier, if you don't know the system yet, you can just download everything. Or if you are used to it already, then you can even create or just download the things that you really need. Let's jump to the other one. Aesthetic and minimal design. So dialogue should not contain information which is irrelevant or rarely needed. Every extra unit of information is a dialogue completes with the relevant units of information and diminishes their relative visibility. Easy one. That. Very simple. Nothing too much, not too much content. I'm not overwhelmed. Minimalistic. Number 9, and we're very close to the end. Help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. Error messages should be expressed in plain language, no codes, precisely indicate the problem, and constructive suggest a solution. 4 or 4 pages. He's a very funny guy, and he has the most awkward 4 not found page on the internet. And yes, it is. Have a look. I also, to be honest, really like the help me voice social media, sign up for my newsletter part. And we go to number 10, help and documentation. Even though it is better if the system can be used without documentation, it may be necessary to provide help and documentation. Any such information should be easy to search, focus on the user's task, list concrete steps to be carried out, and not be too large. What do you think of? I think of cookies, for instance. As more rules for the internet coming up and legal compliance, we can say that these days websites need to explain so much more than they used to. And to wrap it up and go back to our brain, and knowing that those principles are used by designers, I like to quote Joseph Chefroy, who wrote the following, and I must say, he's absolutely right. You often hear that it's absolutely essential for designers to get into the heads of their users, and I couldn't agree more. Knowing how the human brain works is one of the best ways to do that. And with that, I would like to say thank you.